Good morning. My name is Lee Zeldin. I'm a congressman from the 1st Congressional District of New York. Congress's most important role is to keep Americans safe, secure, and free. We are too often reminded that while we frequently hear and read about terrorist attacks abroad, we have a very real ongoing homeland security threat within our own borders. In the wake of the Orlando terrorist attack and the rise of terrorism across the world, it is important now more than ever that our nation and the free world define and eliminate the threat posed by Islamic terror groups. This week, the House will take action on a counterterrorism package to help protect our country and citizens. Included in this package is my language from my proposal, the Protect America Act, H.R. 4237, which would prevent terrorists from purchasing firearms or explosives while protecting the due process rights of Americans. I have not met one member of Congress in favor of terrorists being able to purchase firearms. The real debate is whether and how to ensure due process for Americans. My proposal with Senator Cornyn in no way, shape, or form infringes upon the rights of law-abiding gun owners. What it does is ensure that terrorists do not have the ability to legally purchase firearms. And isn't that really the goal here? 2 weeks ago, House Democrats waged a disruptive and destructive sit-in to shut down Congress because they supposedly wanted to pass legislation that prevents terrorists from being able to purchase firearms. Now they can, with this proposal coming to the House floor, but Democrats are opposing it for no good reason. It's because they only want the political fight and because they don't want to confront the three inconvenient truths I'm about to address. Regardless of whether you are a liberal Democrat or a conservative Republican, my proposal with Senator Cornyn should be supported by all. It would require only the most partisan bad intentions of my Democratic colleagues not to be praising and supporting this legislation. Just think about it. It would also be the height of hypocrisy and irony not to push this measure with their full energy. This bill wasn't written by the NRA. This proposal was drafted by members of Congress who understand how to prevent terrorists from purchasing firearms while protecting the due process rights of Americans. There are three very important truths that my Democratic colleagues shouldn't find so inconvenient. First, the Orlando shooter was an Islamic terrorist pledging allegiance to ISIS, yelling Allahu Akbar. And two, the rifle and handgun used in the Orlando shooting didn't just march itself into the nightclub that night and discharge itself. I'll get to the third inconvenient truth in a moment. But first, I want to point out that in reality, there's a whole lot more going on here beyond a gun control debate. And attempts by members of Congress to narrow this issue so glaringly is alienating the rest of our country who understand the bigger picture. We also must unite to ID the threat of radical Islam, because you cannot eliminate a threat that you are not willing to identify. And what makes matters worse is that it is clear that even if the president ID'd the threat, he has no idea how to eliminate it. And that, unfortunately, is the third inconvenient truth. Congress has a duty to prioritize national security over party politics, which is why Democrats should join House Republicans in passing this important proposal to prevent terrorists from purchasing firearms and to keep Americans safe. It is their duty.
Thanks, Lee. From the beginning, I have been saying that we need to be clear-eyed about who the enemy is. We need to stay focused on the threat of homegrown terrorism. But right now, we have an administration that simply refuses to step up its game. Last month, as part of our Better Way agenda, we put out 67 recommendations to keep America safe. Last week, Leader McCarthy, working with our terrorism task force, proposed common sense legislation to address the threat to our homeland, including the Zeldin legislation. It's common sense because it requires our government to prioritize its efforts to counter violent extremism. That includes defining the enemy as radical Islamic terrorism. Believe it or not, we do not do this already. This legislation is also common sense because it takes steps to make sure that guns don't fall into the hands of terrorists. This is something that we have to get right. Law enforcement has been telling us over and over, we have to get this right because if we get this wrong, we could undermine their own terrorist investigations. Let me say this. There isn't a person in Congress that wants a terrorist to get a gun. But we also want to make sure that we do not undermine those ongoing terrorist investigations that law enforcement is conducting. And as I have said, we are not going to compromise the Constitution. We are not going to infringe upon anyone's rights without due process. This is very important. The Constitution is a beautiful document. It is so efficient you can fit it in your pocket. We are not going to actually pass legislation that infringes upon a person's constitutional rights. So we have to get this right. We don't want to infringe upon the Second Amendment. We don't want to infringe upon the Fifth Amendment. We don't want to infringe upon anyone's basic constitutional rights. We can get this right while honoring the Constitution. This is what we all swear to serve. When we take the oath of office, we swear to support and defend the Constitution, and that is our duty. Now, we need to define this enemy. We need to defeat this enemy. I also want to take a moment to note today that the House will take up landmark legislation to reform our mental health system. This is what Congressman Tim Murphy, a clinical psychologist, has poured his life into. He has spent years working on mental health reform. This is bipartisan reform. It came out unanimous from the Commerce Committee. That also is something that we think needs to be addressed to address the gun violence that is occurring in America, which is dealing with the issue of mental illness. That is coming to the floor today. So I want to thank Congressman Murphy for that. Because of this bill, people will get the treatment that they need when they need it. It's a great breakthrough, and I look forward to today's vote.
Terrorism has come to America's shores. We've seen time and time again, just in the last 7 years, more than a dozen terrorist attacks on American soil. And every time it happens, all you see is the president trying to shift the debate to gun control. Why shouldn't the president be working with us here in Congress to confront the real threat of radical Islamic terrorism, instead of trying to take away the gun rights of law-abiding citizens? So here in the House, we're going to continue to protect the rights of law-abiding citizens, to stand up for our Bill of Rights, as the Speaker said. All of those 10 rights are critically important to Americans. The Second Amendment is not going to be infringed. None of those Bill of Rights are going to be infringed. And the president ought to be working with us to confront this real serious threat. But if he doesn't, we're going to continue to take action to deal with the real problem of terrorism in the United States and the radicalization of Americans. In addition to that, we also see a growing crisis in this country with our mental health system. I want to congratulate Tim Murphy, and I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of his legislation. This bill is 3 years in the making. It's taken a lot of hard work to go and identify all the problems in our mental health system and come up with real solutions to allow parents to get more involved if their children have mental health issues, to close loopholes within the mental health system, and to increase the coordination so that we can confront a real problem that's led to not only murders but suicides in so many cases across this country, and it's touched families amongst all of us. So I'm glad that we're going to be bringing that legislation forward, and I look forward to a really strong vote later today on that. And then finally, when it comes to the announcement that we saw by the FBI director yesterday, it's a big disappointment that charges weren't brought forward, but at the same time, the FBI director pointed out that Hillary Clinton broke the law. If you look at what he said in his conversation yesterday, hostile actors gained access to Secretary Clinton's personal email account. Secretary Clinton and her colleagues were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information. The FBI director's comments yesterday didn't close this case. It raised a lot more serious questions that need to be answered by Secretary Clinton about what her intentions really were when she broke the law, and what happened and who got access to that highly classified, sensitive information, including hostile actors all around the world who want to do us harm.
Major terrorist attacks on innocent lives are becoming way too common. People shouldn't live in fear as they go about their daily lives. My heart breaks every time I see these continued attacks around the world on people that are just going about their daily lives. Sadly, Paris, Brussels, San Bernardino, Orlando, Syria, Iraq, Turkey, they're just some of the places directly impacted by the rise of Islamic terrorism. We have a global terrorism epidemic. But when the world looked to us for leadership, President Obama chose to walk away. When he should have stepped up, he chose instead to step aside and focus on narrow political wins over global security. A power vacuum was created and destructive forces have filled it. ISIS remains a serious terrorist force. I want to join in expressing gratitude to Congressman Lee Zeldin, who's here with us today. He's been working on this issue and helping ensure that our legislation strikes an important balance. Amid the chaos and the heartache of these attacks, America and its allies must be resolved to combat Islamic terrorism here, in Turkey, in Iraq, and wherever it exists.
For the past 20 years, I've been an advocate for improving our mental health system here in this country. So I could not be more pleased that the House plans to vote this week on the Helping Families in Mental Health Crisis Act, which is designed to aid millions of individuals dealing with mental illness. Last week, I visited a behavioral health care center in my district. It's a facility that deals with the exact issues that this legislation seeks to improve. There are few families in America that have escaped the challenge of addiction or depression or other mental illness. This legislation will drive innovation and fight the ongoing crisis regarding the shortage of mental health beds in rural populations and provide the much-needed resources for those who don't have access to the care that they need. Mental illness is a national problem, a problem to which we have solutions. This legislation puts us on the right path to be more comprehensive and effective when dealing with our mental health system here in America.
Questions? Luke?
Speaker Ryan, are you confident in the FBI's investigation of Secretary Clinton, and do you feel that she got preferential treatment in this case?
Well, I'll let everybody be the judge of that. It looks like it to me. I'd say a couple of things. Number one, I think Director Comey's press conference tomorrow raises more questions than provides answers. That's point number one. Point number two, there are a lot of questions that have to be answered. And so we're going to be asking those questions. I know the Judiciary Committee sent a letter, I think, last night with a number of questions. OGR, that committee is going to invite the FBI director to come up and testify. He did say that short of prosecution, some kind of administrative action might be in order. Look, I was on the ticket in 2012. After the convention, you get the full, deep classified information as part of transition, as part of being a nominee. I think the DNI, Clapper, should deny Hillary Clinton access to classified information during this campaign, given how she so recklessly handled classified information. That's point one. Point two, Director Comey's presentation shredded the claims that Secretary Clinton made throughout the year with respect to this issue. He laid out a case how the things she had been saying she had or had not done were false. So we have seen nothing but stonewalling and dishonesty from Secretary Clinton on this issue, and that means there are a lot more questions that need to be answered.
Just a follow-up.
Manu, yeah.
Do you think that, in regards to classified briefings, is there anything Congress can do to deny?
We're looking into. I don't know the answer to that question. Whether it's something Congress can do, I've just got to say, from my own experience, you get access to deeply classified material once you leave the convention as the nominee on a regular basis. It's part of a transition government with no indictment occurring, but a discussion or a call for administrative action. I think it's the least we can do, given how she was so reckless in handling classified material and sending classified information on unsecure servers. So look, I think that's something that the administration should do on its own, but we'll look into seeing if that's something we can do as well.
A special prosecutor, is that necessary there?
Well, we're not going to foreclose any option. Wong. I don't answer people shouting out questions. Wong.
Yeah, Speaker Ryan, the House Freedom Caucus has come out against the anti-terrorism package, which contains Mr. Zeldin's bill, over due process concerns. Do you believe that this bill is in real jeopardy at this point, or do you think there's still a path forward?
I think there's still a path forward. We're in ongoing conversations. We just released this bill, which is the product of our task force, on Friday. We have members from both sides of the aisle who want to make improvements, who want to make changes to the bill. We want to make sure we get it right. The last thing we're going to do is rush something to the floor that we don't have right. And again, this matters to us. This is the Constitution. This means we get this right. We do not want to violate a citizen's due process rights. So that is why I want to make sure we get it right. And what they're doing is making sure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed so that we preserve and protect the Constitution, which is what we swear to do when we're sworn in office. So we want to get it right. We're listening from all of our suggestions from our colleagues. There are colleagues who want to make changes to the terrorism, some other parts of this bill. And so we're gathering all of that information so we make a good decision.
Last question. Are you confident that you will be able to bring the gun bill up for a vote at some point? Would that be this week or next week?
Yes, we are, because we think this issue needs to be addressed. We think, first of all, the administration needs to step up its game. They're not doing what is necessary to combat radical Islamic terrorism, whether it's overseas or here at home. Number two, we want to make sure that we codify a practice of making sure that terrorists don't get guns while preserving citizens' rights. Citizens' rights is very important. We can have security and keep to the Constitution at the same time. That's why we're going to get it right, and we're going to do it when we're ready, and we believe we can do it in a good amount of time. Thank you.